Jonathan Jones, who comes to us live from Commanders Camp, but this is the big news of the offseason, from 6 games to 11 games, and this is it, JJ. What more can you tell us?
Well, it's 11 games, and it's interesting because a lot of people that I'd spoken to in the past week were thinking it would be around 12 games. Why 12 games? Because 12 games would keep him out of the Houston Texans game, but I started hearing actually it may actually be 11. The fine was always going to be hefty, and speaking with sources with the league, with the union, around Deshaun, around the Cleveland Browns, what became apparent were there were 2 sticking points with the NFL. Number one, they did not feel that Deshaun Watson had expressed any sort of remorse or contrition. And so the NFL did not like that, and they were going to go aggressively at Deshaun to get the sort of punishment that they were hoping for when they started this process with Judge Sue L. Robinson. And then the other point, of course, it was about the fine. It was about the money that when he played when he played for the Houston Texans and got paid but didn't play for the Houston Texans, that didn't sit well with the NFL. That it was a sort of a paid vacation was one of the terms that was thrown around to me. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but that was a term that a source had used. And so because he got paid upwards of $10 million last year to not play, the NFL, of course, wanted to seek out getting some of that money back, of course, getting about half of that back in the form of a fine, and then mandatory counseling. Deshaun Watson, at first, in his introductory press conference with the Cleveland Browns, had been asked about counseling, and he essentially kind of wrote it off and said he didn't really need it. Like, for what? And then as we heard Deshaun speak more, he talked about going to counseling, and he talked about the positive impact that it had on him. Well, the NFL mandating that in this settlement agreement that I'm told still being circulated. One source told me signatures are still, there's not ink on that paper just yet. And so that's why over the past couple of days, we've been in this sort of hurry up to wait mode. But here we have it, 11 games eligible to return for the Houston Texans. And then, of course, the $5 million fine and mandatory counseling.
So, JJ, kind of take us back and tell us how we ended up here, where we started with the Sue L. Robinson saying 6 games and the NFL really saying that is not nearly enough. How did they convince Watson to accept almost twice as much punishment?
Yeah, it's a bit of a leverage play here. So first of all, let's go back to Sue L. Robinson's judgment. I read the 16-page report, and to me, it seemed very clear what Sue Robinson was saying in this report was that she talked about the egregious behavior that she found Deshaun Watson had exhibited over that span of time. And, of course, the league only presented 4 or 5 cases to Judge Robinson, but she still found, and she used the word egregious in this. However, she said, hey, the collective bargaining agreement, your precedent that you have set, it's really only 6 games. Now, had you anticipated this sort of behavior and written into the CBA what the punishment would be for this unprecedented behavior, I would be more inclined to abide by that. But because they couldn't see the future, she essentially wrote, hey, we're not going to go ahead and give you what you're asking for. Then the NFL said, all right, well, we're going to trigger our appeals process. Remember, in the previous CBA and in previous iterations in the NFL, what you had was Roger Goodell sort of being judge, jury, and executioner, and then the league or the player usually would appeal that to some court. Usually wasn't successful. The players' union fought tooth and nail during the last CBA negotiations when it was agreed to in March of 2020, just before COVID shut down our world. And they said, hey, we're going to flip this process. We're going to have the arbitrator up first. And then the NFL, if you want to, you can appeal. Well, that then happened. This was the first case. This was certainly the first major case where we had this process take place. And so the NFL, with the hammer that they could have laid down, they could have gotten an indefinite suspension of at least a year. That's what they wanted. They wanted an even larger fine, I'm told. But instead, they reached this settlement where Deshaun Watson will be able to return to the football field against his former team, the Houston Texans, in Week 13 after sitting out the first 11 weeks. And now it's, of course, up to Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns. How much do you play Deshaun Watson right now? Do you give the ball to Jacoby Brissett? Are you going to look elsewhere? Because at some point, as that suspension starts to end, Deshaun Watson can start reintegrating himself into the team facilities and onto the practice field as he prepares to take over in Week 13 against the Texans.
Yeah, what's the next move for the Cleveland Browns now that they know that Watson is going to be out twice as long as they originally thought?
Yeah, great question. It's something that I've been preparing for the last couple of weeks. I was in Cleveland about 10 days ago and talking with folks there. It was, we want to see what Jacoby has got. Now, they got Jacoby Brissett in the offseason, very much understanding that Deshaun Watson was very unlikely going to be available in week one, the first month of the season. And, of course, they got that judgment from Sue Robinson where it was the first 6 games. But everyone I spoke to in Cleveland said, hey, it may not be that. We're going to issue a word of caution and say we're waiting on the next step. They believe in Jacoby Brissett. I would have to imagine Kevin Stefanski is going to give Brissett the overwhelming majority of first-team reps, both in practice and in the final 2 exhibitions that the Cleveland Browns have. Do they go after Jimmy Garoppolo? That's the question that a lot of people have, and I understand why. They're not going to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. They're not going to trade for his salary cap number, which is around $24 million. Everyone in the NFL is waiting on the San Francisco 49ers to ultimately cut Jimmy Garoppolo, and then there can be a sort of feeding frenzy on Garoppolo. Are the Browns interested? They've done their homework, no question about it. They will continue to monitor it, and it obviously depends on the play of Jacoby Brissett. If he's lights out there, you don't really have to go after Garoppolo. And even if you do go after Garoppolo, once he is cut by the Niners, it's going to take him some acclimating to the team, to the system, even though it's a system that we believe he can thrive in and succeed if he is healthy. Another huge question that the Browns would have to answer. So, are they going to go to Jimmy Garoppolo? It's possible. I don't think it will happen via a trade. It's very possible after he gets cut by the Niners in the next week or so, and if there is no other market for Jimmy Garoppolo. But until that point, the Cleveland Browns are full steam ahead with Jacoby Brissett.
The NFL did not like the original suspension that came down of 6 games, and most everybody in the public did not like that either. How do you think this is going to sit with NFL fans and just sports fans alike who've taken interest in this case?
Well, you know, the NFLPA really talked a lot about the Sue Robinson hearing and how they thought and felt that it was a fair process and that the report was, of course, made public. And the NFL, again, could have come down much harder than they wanted to because they had that ability. Instead, you know, this is a settlement. It is a compromise, and a fine is involved. Mandatory counseling is involved. I'm not sure how fans are going to take it. I can imagine, like many negotiations, at the end of it, neither side is ultimately happy, but it is what it is. And now the Cleveland Browns can move forward. Now the NFL can move forward. The union, Deshaun Watson, everyone can sort of move forward from this point, and we all sort of now have an end date on this sort of punishment and what this saga that has lasted more than a year and so many ups and downs. I would have to imagine, again, not very much happiness on any side, but there has to be some relief on all sides that we can finally turn the page and get to the next chapter of this.
And Watson going to be able to play this season and potentially for a playoff run as well for a team that has high expectations. That was something that may have been taken away from him had the NFL had their way completely. Jonathan Jones with us from Commanders camp today, but the Watson news commanding our attention here on CBS Sports HQ. 11 games, $5 million, and he will have to undergo forms of counseling as well. The NFL season kicks off on CBS September the 11th. Week 1 have a couple of great games in the afternoon window involving 3 AFC West teams. The Chiefs are at the Cards. The Raiders taking on the Chargers in LA.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.